Okay, I think we can start now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second part of our ERC Starting Grant mentoring event. This is the Social Sciences and Humanities breakout session, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Pawel Korpal, and I'm a board member of the Young Academy of Europe, and I will have a pleasure to moderate this session today. As you might already know, the aim of this session is to give an example of how a funding panel works and how decisions within evaluation panels are made to recommend a grant application for funding. And we will aim to reproduce the stage where the panel decides which applications are actually put forward for an interview. So that's, as you remember, step one in the evaluation process. And obviously, we will not be able to provide you with an exact replica of how a specific funding panel works. We will be discussing two actual proposals, but we have not seen the reports or the scores. And if you can see that panel members refer to them in the discussion, these scores or reports were created for the sake of this event. Our panel will also be a bit smaller. We will try to show you how panel members in general discuss submissions before they reach a decision. And we are honored to have four distinguished scholars with us today who have extensive experience in evaluating grant submissions and who have agreed to serve as panel members at our event today. Professor Marcel and Dikken, Professor Poul Holm, Professor Miklós Koren, and Professor Peter Wagner, as you can see in the slide. Professor Marcel den Dikken holds a dual appointment at Edfish Lorand University and the Hungarian Research Center for Linguistics in Budapest. He is also a corresponding member of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, and Professor den Dikken served as a panel member at the European Research Council and evaluated starting, consolidator, and advanced grants. Professor Poul Holm is the director of the Trinity Center for Environmental Humanities at Trinity College Dublin, and also vice chair of the humanities class of Academia Europaea. He was PI in an ERC advanced grant, and Professor Holm is also involved in grant evaluation. Professor Miklós Koren is professor of economics at Central European University in Vienna. He won an ERC starting grant in 2012 and served as well on the starting grant evaluation panel. And finally, Professor Peter Wagner is a research professor in the Department of Sociological Theory, Philosophy of Law, and Methodology of the Social Sciences at the University of Barcelona. And Professor Wagner has been a member of a number of evaluation panels at ERC as well. Let me very briefly present the structure of this session for you. First, we will evaluate two grant submissions, Grant 1 on seasons and climate change, and Grant 2 on altruism. We will give about 15 to 20 minutes per grant to be discussed, and then this will be followed by some kind of debriefing, general remarks from panel members, as well as suggestions for future applicants. And then we will conclude this session by a short Q&A session. So about questions and answers, please write questions or comments in the chat. This will be monitored, and we will be happy to answer your questions at the end of the event today, so during the Q&A session. Also, please ensure that your microphone remains muted and that you turn off your video. So I think that's it when it comes to the introduction, and now I'll be very happy to move to the main part. I'll just stop sharing. All right, so let's move to the evaluation panel itself. So, dear panel members, my name is Pawel Korpal, and I will act as panel chair today. We have four panel members today. We have Professor Marcel den Dikken, Professor Poul Holm, Professor Miklós Koren, and Professor Peter Wagner. And we have two grant submissions to be discussed today. So let's start our discussions with Grant 1. This grant is on seasons and climate change. And in general, in the submission, the applicant aims to advance knowledge on how the concepts of seasons may impact institutions and also how it is shaped by institutions. And I would like to give the floor to the lead reviewer for this grant submission, and the lead reviewer will be Professor Peter Wagner. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Pavel, for this introduction. Yes, indeed, I will be short in the summary because we have all read the proposal. This is one of the rather numerous proposals on climate change that we keep receiving in these days, but it has a very particular angle. Namely, it looks at seasons and the ways seasons change due to climate change. And that is the social science angle on it, it looks at the ways seasons used to be represented in different societies and settings, and how these representations, how they can possibly change and be part of adaptation to climate change. So in short, the proposal wants to examine existing representations, wants to assess the potential for adaptation to new situations, and then in particular analyze flexibilities on the one hand or barriers on the other hand to such adaptation. This obviously addresses a very important topic. It's, as the reviewers have also pointed out, it is an original combination of different areas. It has a background in anthropological research, but it also looks at institutional analysis from political science and makes a very interesting original combination of those. I want to highlight what I see also gathering from the various views as strength, but then also point to some weaknesses. As I've touched upon already, it has a very strong theoretical basis, which actually goes beyond the direct topic, broad explorations in social and anthropological theory, but partly, as I said, also in political science theorizing. That's one of the important features. The second one, it develops a very interesting comparative study, which combines comparative ethnography with comparative institutional analysis, namely looking at two very different localities in Norway and in New Zealand for representations of climate change and their adaptability. So that's also, it's a demanding and also a very original approach. And thirdly, what is characteristic of it, it has three phases. It has a more strictly speaking analytical phase, but then it moves to, it combines the empirical analytical analysis with normative questionings, and then it has an intervening component. It wants to engage with the local cultures and communities. All that makes it a very interesting, demanding and original and very well crafted proposal. It's very clear in its outlines, but also some weaknesses have been pointed out. There is one key question, namely the link between representations and institutions. Representations belong broadly to cultural, social cultural analysis, whereas institutions, we mostly look at more firmer, more formally organized settings, and how exactly the link is to be made. It's competently drawn on the different traditions, but how exactly the link is made is maybe not entirely clear. There is a second question which I pose myself personally, because there is a broad debate about globalization broadly understood, which also means climate becomes a global issue. Also, people more and more live in urban settings, so that the local seasonal representations may become less important. One may deplore that and see that as a problem to address, but here it's not very clear how important local representations in Bergen in Norway or in an area of New Zealand will still be given this global change. And thirdly, I would like to point out that exactly how the link between the descriptive and the normative is made maybe also begs further questions that, if we over agree, we could ask possibly at the interview in the next step, but we should point that out, that there is an argument about the quality of the representation without really saying what criteria for quality are. So that's my first take on this proposal.
Thank you so much, Peter, for this summary. And I would like to open the discussion among other panel members? I can see Paul raising his hand.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Wagner, for that insightful summary of the project. I fully agree with you that this is an interesting project that is based on an acute and original observation of the quality of seasons and how seasonal representations are critical for how we live with climate change. I also share your view that the comparative approach is interesting and worthwhile. Having said that, I do think that there are some very, to my mind, serious questions to raise. One of the questions already was raised by you. Do we actually live according to the seasons nowadays? Obviously, in a modern world, much of our life is structured along virtual and migratory ways of life that don't really relate to seasonality. And I have a sense that when this critical role of local communities is stressed again and again in the application, I feel quite worried that we are somehow looking at a proposal that is harking back to some of the original starting points of social anthropology, which I would think we have left. But more importantly, perhaps, is the question of the role of time. I was struck by what I have to say is quite a shallow statement in the proposal. It's stated that the past is no longer the key to the future, and it's actually highlighted in the application as really a major tenet of the application. That strikes me as a historian as quite a shallow statement. Obviously, the past is all we have in order to assess the present, and there is no data on the future. So obviously, the past, regardless of climate change, will have to inform the way in which we envision the future. And my final point is perhaps more speculative. So seasonality is clearly climate. But one thing that to a northerner is much more important than seasonality is actually light, which is not changing because of climate change. So winters are dark, summers are bright. And that perhaps is the most important factor when you live in through 4 seasons of the year. So I would think all of these questions are questions we absolutely need to raise at the interview level. The applicant is clearly well prepared, has a highly structured, really well thought out proposal, but we need to probe into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Holm. Do we have any other comments from panel members? Yes, Professor Dikken.
There are a few things that I would like to echo about what Poul just said, and then I have some things of my own. I think I would second the observation that the project is riddled with shallow statements. In fact, the project proposal is very confidently written, yet at the same time peculiarly rhetorical, sometimes even to the point of sounding pretentious. And it's never become clear to me, unfortunately, to what extent the starting point of the project, which the PI calls groundbreaking, truly is groundbreaking. Because when I read this, and I read this project several times to make sure that I hadn't actually been led up the garden path, to my mind, it's mostly commonsensical. We can go into that in more detail later on. I find that the PI certainly is uniquely placed to run this project, and it's an excellent PI. The project is fundamentally and quintessentially multidisciplinary. It's also highly timely, and it has societal impact, which is not something that is necessarily something that recommends the project, but it is on the side worth mentioning. The project is ambitious. And the non-scientific component of the project, more than anything else, I think is what brings in the primary point of novelty for this project. Scientifically, it doesn't strike me as fundamentally groundbreaking, but the fact that it brings in such a very significant non-scientific component is interesting, potentially groundbreaking, but it's also worrying, because the non-scientific component of the project remains entirely vague, not just in part B1, but also in part B2. And I don't think it could ever have the rigor that is required in order to be high gain. I just two more comments here. I find the central hypothesis to sound more or less like truism, and the research questions are wide open, not just in B1, but also in B2. And another thing that this is worth mentioning also for the interest of those watching and planning to write a proposal themselves. The project proposes to accommodate some PhD students and a postdoc, but it never makes it clear what the work that the PhD students are supposed to be doing on the project will do to generate viable PhD thesis. All that it says is that the postdocs and the PhD students' responsibilities lie within the main body of fieldwork, but it's not clear to what extent clear PhD dissertations can be defined by the work that they're supposed to be doing. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Professor Dikken. Any other points that panel members would like to raise?
Can I just come in here? I have to admit this project is a little bit outside my area of expertise, but I'd like to relate to the point raised by Professor Holm about what are seasons, and in that I think it's very valuable to have these two settings, Norway and New Zealand. I'm a little bit skeptical, whether these are really comparable and whether how much we can learn from comparing these two countries. But maybe this is something that at an interview stage we can probe into further. Maybe the PI has put more thinking into that. And something that I can comment on, having looked at the proposal, is in terms of the organization of the project. Looks very, very clear. What's going to happen when. So in terms of project management, it looks a very credible proposal.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other comments to grant one before we move to the discussion?
I think that concern about the very small team and the role of the PhD students is critical. I did not see any kind of evidence that there will be a ground truthing of the project at any stage. There's no, there will be a lot of engagement with local communities, but what about the feedback from other academics? And this could potentially, in a very small team of only 4 people, turn into an echo chamber. And especially for the PhD students, that could be detrimental to the future career.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Holm. Thank you all panel members. I will try to summarize the main points after we discuss grant 2, so that we can put these remarks in our panel report. But let's now move to the second grant, where the applicant aims to look at the interrelationships between altruism, education, and religion. And I would like to give the floor first to the lead reviewer of this grant submission, Professor Miklós Koren.
Thank you. So let me quickly summarize the proposal and also the views of the other reviewers. I will mostly focus, of course, on my own reflection on the project, but if I see some concerns, I'll try to highlight them that others have raised, and then of course we'll discuss other aspects. So as an applied economist myself, I will mostly focus on the methodological aspects of the proposal, and invite the other colleagues of the panel to address concerns like fit into the literature, state of the art, I think they would be more suited to do that. So the project proposes to study the determinants of altruism, with the question being why some people are more altruistic than others toward distant others, so not family and close friends. And there are a set of correlations that are reported in the proposal that people with more education or more religious people tend to be more altruistic. But so here's where the proposal comes in. The main contribution would be to establish causality in these correlations with careful econometric research designs, whether education causes altruism and religion causes altruism or not. And there are two research designs proposed. One is basically a twin study to compare identical twins, which can hold all nature-related kind of genetic confounders fixed, and only the environment-related effects will be varying between twins. And in certain disciplines, this is a well-known research design. The second study is a longitudinal study, where the idea for causal identification is basically post hoc ergo propter hoc. So if altruism happens after changes to religious, after a person becomes religious, then it is evidence that there is some causal relationship between the two. So looking at most of the reviewers, I think there was a consensus that the overall question is very interesting, and actually the general motivation of trying to find the causal relationship between these three concepts is promising. But practically all the reviewers shared some concerns about the methodology, and I share them as well. The main concern being that these methods are really designed for treatment evaluation. So when some individuals are treated, some other individuals are not treated, and we can compare the effect of the treatment by following these individuals over time. But so this kind of treatment evaluation methodology is really focusing on the individual, and when we're thinking about altruism or religion, these are very much social constructs, and practically everyone was missing the discussion of the social context from the proposal. And so whether this is really an appropriate methodology to study religiosity and altruism. Now, when it comes to the scores, I think there's a large variation in the scores that the different reviewers have given. The average of 3.0 reflects that people have seen value in this proposal, but it's probably not among the top half of the proposals we have seen today, but it's of course something we can discuss later. In terms of the PI, the reviewers have appreciated the quantity and the quality of the publications, and also in terms of the research topics, they were very much in line with the current proposal, so that makes the proposal credible. If anything, one concern was the relatively narrow focus of the publication track record so far, so it wasn't evidence of a broad contribution. So with that, I would like to open it up for discussion, and if anyone has particularly critical, or if you had a review that very much disagreed with what I just said, please speak up.
Yes, so let's thank you so much, Professor Koren, for the summary. Let's open the discussion now among panel members. Professor Wagner.
Professor Wagner
raising his hand.
Yes, since you, Miklós, have focused on methodology, maybe add a moral component on the theoretical presuppositions that go into the proposal. Because what is interesting, but also a bit problematically striking, is the way the question is set up at the beginning. There are really three different kinds of theoretical assumptions. The one is the one relating to education and religion is sociological holism, one could say. the individual traits argument is individualism as in economics and psychology, as is pointed out there as well. And then there is the genetic component, which is in a sense meant to be held constant, as you said. Now, the problem there is these different starting points. I don't think you have said it in different terms, more from the methodological angle, but I would say they cannot be sorted out by methodological means because they are theoretical presuppositions that enter in there. And so I see that as a basic problem of this proposal, as interesting as it is otherwise. And let me add, from the more sociological point of view, this weakness, as I see it, also becomes clear from the fact that the proposal mentions basically one key sociological publication which underpins this causal explanation approach, as it's called. This is indeed a very prominent article, but then it's wrong on the over-socialized conception of man. But it is from 1961. And since then, much has happened in terms of sociological theorizing. Most people have abandoned this strict holistic conception. So there are many things that have gone on that are not really figured in the proposal. This makes me very skeptical that something truly important could come out of this.
Thank you, Professor Wagner. Any other points that should be raised? Professor Dikken.
Yeah, probably echoing some of the things that have already been said. I want to focus particularly on the significance of what seems on its face to be the most original component of the project, namely the twins study, the monozygotic twin study. What I'm really not sure about, and I've been thinking about it for a long time, is what the role of that study could be within the project, how it could actually contribute to what the project wants to accomplish. So let me give you the long and the short of it. Basically, there's an observation that altruism is commonly linked to education and religion, and there is some literature that suggests that both education and religion have a genetic factor, but the environmental factors probably play a bigger role, as the PI points out. And the PI makes it explicit in the application text that he doesn't want to prove that altruism is genetic. So my sense actually also is that nobody wants to believe or expect that altruism is genetic anyway. But if altruism is unlikely to be genetic, then what is the point of studying monozygotic twins in such detail? One might then just as well have studied genetically unrelated people for whom the effect of their environment on their education and religion is variable. And it seems to be mostly about the effect of the environment on education and religion that this project is focusing. So if that is what the focus is on, I really don't see what the point is of this study of twins, which is, in my experience, the most original part of the project. The project, I think, is also small, and on the presentational side, what may very well have contributed to sinking this project is that, unfortunately, in part B1, the project never explicitly spells out its research hypotheses. It does a very good job on that in part B2, but it doesn't do it in part B1.
Thank you so much, Professor Dikken. Any other points that might relate to the strengths or weaknesses of this proposal? Professor Holm.
Yeah, thank you. Speaking as one who is totally outside of this research topic, I have to say that I was struck by the statement regarding risk. So the first risk, it said, is that the analysis may show that there are no significant changes in altruism associated with changes in the level of educational and religious involvement. In this case, the research will seek to identify the omitted variables that cause the spurious correlation. So is the applicant saying what I think this means, namely that if he doesn't find evidence to support his hypothesis, he will just go on a hide and seek? Is that what we're looking at? Excuse me for being so blunt, but it struck me as a very odd phrase.
I agree. It's a very, very odd phrase, in that, it might be a risk to the publication process, but not not to science. If you find a 0, that's an equally interesting, or maybe not equally interesting, but certainly valuable finding. That's probably not what we have in mind when we think about risk. But in defense of the, I see it, given that there is a positive correlation, there might be some omitted factors that are causing these correlations. If there's no causal relationship, then it might be worth pursuing these omitted factors further, but I think it was indeed unfortunately phrased in the proposal.
Thank you for these discussions. Any other comments, final comments to grant submission 2? All right, thank you so much. I would like to try to summarize the main points that were raised in the panel discussion. So getting back to grant submission 1, we emphasized its strong theoretical background, the fact that the submission is interdisciplinary, or the research that would be conducted is highly interdisciplinary. PI is uniquely placed to conduct this research. The societal impact was also emphasized in the panel discussions, but there were some weaknesses identified as well. Small team and the role of PhD students seems to be quite vague, so that could be specified. The central hypothesis was regarded as a truism, and actually the grant proposal itself, as was discussed in the panel discussion, contains a few more shallow statements. Anything else that should be added to the report? This will of course be extended, but anything else that we should definitely put in the report? All right, so moving on to grant 2 on altruism. So the overall question was deemed to be very interesting, and the publication record, so the quality as well as the quantity of publications was judged as good, satisfactory. But there were some serious concerns mentioned both in the report of the lead reviewer and then the discussion of the panel among the panel members. It was also mentioned that there is a lot of focus on individualism and not really enough discussion on the social context, which seems to be important in the discussion on altruism. There were some serious reservations discussed related to the twins parts of the twins study that will be extended in our report. In part BA, interestingly, the applicant never mentions the hypotheses clearly, and at the end of our discussion, we realized, or we discussed, that actually the potential rejection of the hypothesis is treated in the submission as a risk of the project. Anything else that should be added, maybe to these methodological concerns? Anything else that we should add to the report?
There was the point that Professor Wagner raised, that the proposal does not make sufficient contact with the literature, so relevant pieces are not cited. So if I have the feeling that this proposal is likely not going forward to the second round. So if we are writing up a panel report explaining the rejection, that maybe that should also be a sentence in there.
Yeah. Okay, so I would like now to ask you to provide a general assessment. So let's try to decide if these grants, or maybe one of them, maybe none of them, should be put forward for an interview. So stage 2, step 2 of the process.
Can I come in?
Sure, Professor Wagner.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comparison of these two proposals because I think we have had quite nuanced discussions of both. but I think it came out quite clearly that there were basic design problems in the altruism proposal, where we could see that there is not much point in taking it forward. It's unlikely that these issues could really be resolved in a discussion. Whereas for the climate change proposal, there is something which the panel probably would need to discuss now, because there were serious critical components. And the question which we have to ask ourselves is whether there is a chance that the applicant can successfully answer these queries which we have. And they were significant. If together we come to the conclusion that they add up to so many and so significant issues, then probably we shouldn't take this forward either. But it may be that here we think that to some of these issues, an answer might be given once we can speak directly to the applicant. I think this is for me the difference between the two proposals.
Thank you for this comment, Professor Koren.
I tend to agree. I think it's a great summary that with respect to the altruism proposal, there are like very, very strong concerns. And there were some concerns with the other proposal as well, but I have the feeling that these have the potential to be addressed. So I think maybe the bigger part of the discussion should focus on whether that's something we can discuss further in an interview, or whether these are really, really strong concerns. So I just concur with Professor Wagner on that.
Professor Holm.
Yeah, I think I would agree as well. I don't think the altruism has much chance of really being successfully defended in an interview. But I think the questions that we raise about the seasonality project are, most of them, stuff that can be addressed in a redesign of the project, potentially could be addressed in further thoughts that could be developed prior to the interview. So I would hope that just the invitation to go forward would cause the applicant to really seek collegial responses to the proposal, and maybe in the process of that will be already confronted with some of these issues that really are down to questions of contextualization more than anything. So I would give it the benefit of the doubt.
President Dikken.
In the assessment of this project in step one, I would certainly have to rely primarily on the judgment of others who have more affinity to this project. I'm a linguist. Language is mentioned exactly once in this project, and there is something about critical discourse theory, but language has perhaps surprisingly, but then again also understandingly, very little to do with this project. So I can't really let my own expertise light shine on this project, but I would like to emphasize that I think we need to be clear among us panelists whether we think that this project has the genuine potential to break novel ground. I saw the potential for groundbreaking research primarily in the non-scientific component of the project, which I thought was vague, very difficult to make rigorous, and therefore I couldn't truly assess it. But perhaps people whose research is more closely aligned with this project could form a clearer perspective on this. I think it's an important question to address, because if we were to come to the conclusion that this project is not tremendously likely to break novel ground, then it's not a good idea to advance it to stage 2.
Do we have any other comments?
Yeah. Can I maybe just one remark, more in relation to what Paul was saying, and thinking again of our joint panel decision, which we have to make. because I think we broadly agree about, well, we entirely agree about the altruism proposal. We broadly agree about the climate change proposal. But there, I think what we have to really assess is, I'm repeating myself, the expectation to get good answers to our queries. And the way Paul was phrasing it, that's the new thing I want to say, is that if the proposal is recast, then it might stand up. That sounds to me like a B, because it means we give the candidate another year and we have good reviews, so comments can be taken in, so we should not let it proceed. To have the hope that merely the invitation to the interview would make the applicant rethink something about the proposal sounds to me unrealistic, because people will want to defend what they have put in writing, and understandably so, because there will be question on that, and they will not be open to rethink with a view to the interview.
So I think it's time to try to give a final assessment of both the applications. So I understand that when it comes to the altruism project, it seems we think it should not be put forward to an interview, right? Would you suggest a B or a C mark for that?
I would recommend a B, definitely not a C, because that would be too harsh a punishment on the PI. Also, if we end up agreeing with the project not going forward, which it sounds like everyone was saying this, I'm happy to write a draft to panel's remarks, and then we can review something. Just to highlight that in terms of the PI's track record, the word satisfactory has a particular meaning in the ERC ranking. That's not what I would use. I would probably higher up, maybe even up to excellent, definitely not the outstanding, but just to not give a very negative message.
Mm-hmm. Do we have a general agreement that the altruism project should get a B? Any comments, any concerns?
I think we agree about that, yes. I also agree a C would be too harsh, because there are good ideas and there is competence, but a B, I think we have agreed upon.
Okay, so what about the other grants? Do we give the benefit of the doubt and let the applicant raise our concerns in an interview, and that will be an A, or should we suggest a B and reapplication?
Maybe one aspect that I could bring in, and also I'm speaking from a bit outside it, and not just a bit outside the field, that if we can bring in other experts in the second round as reviewers and have more narrowly fit reviews, that would definitely help me shape my views on this proposal. So because of that, I would give this proposal the benefit of the doubt. But again, I'm mostly an outsider to this.
I think I would second to that. I think Paul was really arguing for a B, as the way I read it, but I have been more positive overall. But I think we have to keep in mind at this stage that no member of the panel is a social anthropologist, if I see it correctly, and no member is a political scientist, an institutionalist political scientist. So we don't really have the core expertise. So probably, despite our doubts, we should give this proposal the chance to have some specialist evaluations. And if they see the same problems, then probably it will not pass step 2, but maybe we have to get these reviews, the specialist reviews, to be fair to the applicant.
Mm-hmm. Professor Dikken, any comments on that? So A versus B for this one?
I agree with the need for this project to be looked at by people who actually know something about this in detail, and therefore I second the idea to advance this to step 2, although I'm not optimistic that the project will come out victorious in step 2.
And Professor Holm,
Yeah, as you can hear, I'm very much on the balance of this, but yeah, I would be happy to see it once more. And I totally agree with Professor Wagner that the disciplinary competence needs to be drawn on to properly evaluate this proposal. So we probably will benefit from a second round and a chance to interview.
Thank you so much for the comments. I would second that too, with slight reservations. Are there any concerns, final concerns about giving it an A, or do we agree that this grant submission should get an A and should be forward to step 2? We do agree. Okay. Good, thank you so much. And I think that's the end of the evaluation panel session. So enough acting, at least for me. That was totally new for me as a young scholar, and I've never been a panel chair. So I hope I did justice, at least a bit. I would like now to move to the debriefing part. So I would like to ask our panel members to discuss the key points of this role play, maybe share your insight on the evaluation process. And that might be followed by some hints to future applicants or common mistakes that you can see. But maybe let's start with the evaluation process itself and your insight on this, on what we've just done as well. So the role play. Professor Koren?
Can I start maybe? Yeah, so I hope it came out in this simulated session that a lot of the discussion is about detailed discussion about the proposal, about the project. So that's super important, much more so than the CV of the CV is also important, but there's not a lot of discussion about that, I think, because CV kind of speaks for itself. But the proposal and methodological concerns, fit with the literature, these are all discussed in detail, so it has to be really well put together. Something that has come up in B1 versus B2. So in round 1 we only see B1, and it might be that disciplines vary on that. In economics, certainly you would have to have very, very specific hypotheses already in B1, but it might be different in other disciplines.
Thank you for that. We do have a few questions in the chat, and I would like to have at least 10 minutes for that. But I think that it's very important for our panel members to give some further insight. So what else would you suggest maybe to future applicants about the evaluation process, maybe some hints or discussion on some general common mistakes that we make as applicants?
If I can come in, I would like to make one comment on our discussion, because also that might be of interest for applicants. I think in that sense, we have had a typical situation that some cases are really quite clear. There could also have been a quite clear A case from the beginning. But the interesting question is really the discussion we had about the seasonality proposal. And there, I think applicants should know that this in a real panel could go either way, because and that in the light of the kind of critical observations that were made, but then in the end also in terms of the number of proposals that can be taken forward to A. So there, someone could also just be unlucky that with this kind of criticism, it could go in or could not go in, also in light of the numbers. That's one remark. The other is a remark which maybe looking at these two proposals at mistakes that can be made. I will be brief to leave time, but I think the B proposal, as we can now call it, I think the mistake from my point of view there is that this applicant had an idea and probably also was a bit very strongly focused on that idea and was convinced to have a way to address the question, but has not been looking around sufficiently in terms of the resources to draw on, also the methodological, but also the conceptual resources, and was not exploring them sufficiently, so that there were wide gates open to see that this cannot really be done that way. Whereas in the A proposal, I think actually, I mean, I was quite positive in what I said before, but I think there, if there is a mistake, I think this applicant has been throwing too much into the proposal. These three phases, where the properly scientific is only the first one, this is what Marcel and Dikken was pointing out very strongly, they open to weaknesses which can be detrimental to the proposal, but also the conceptual resources. I mean, there were too many disciplines, too many theoretical elements, too much of a claim of having developed something in science studies on their own already, where a panel could have been much more critical than we have been now. So throwing too much in, to be too narrow-minded is a problem, but throwing too much in can also be a problem.
Yeah, can I just add that I think the A proposal suffers a bit from tunnel vision. It's to my mind, it would have been a stronger proposal if it had opened, indicated an awareness that that this is a field that other disciplines, other researchers have thought about in other ways. It just was made very forcefully the point that this is a novel observation that I have made, and I have designed this absolutely groundbreaking new avenue, which I thought was, well, you could, without losing any of your thunder, be opening up your proposal to say, well, this speaks to a wider concern that other disciplines are considering. Anyway, it's always a question of the rhetorics of your application as well, and I just had a sense that this is not really inclusive.
Yes, Professor Dikken.
Just very briefly to follow up on what Professor Holm just said, and then in connection with a comment in the chat, on the rhetorical side, indeed, this climate change project stands out. It's from my point of view, overconfident, and it's the kind of prose that you would expect from the Anglo-Saxon community. This is a native speaker of English. They are definitely more confident using the English language and selling themselves in terms of the English language, more so than people in Central and Eastern Europe. But the warning that I think comes out of our discussion here is that one shouldn't overdo it. And in this respect, the understatement that Central and Eastern Europeans are perhaps better at might to some extent be therapeutic, but never overly understate your case either. With respect to methodology, my point regarding the project, the second project, was that although there are plenty of hypotheses in part B2, there is no clear statement of a hypothesis in part B1. That's the thing that I mentioned. So Joanna Weiss points out that in certain fields of academia, including social anthropology, it's not common to work with clearly defined hypotheses, but this project, the second project, clearly does have very specifically defined hypotheses. It just doesn't take the trouble of including them in part B1. And that really shoots you in the foot. If you have hypotheses but you don't spell them out in part B2, then you rob yourself of the opportunity to be valued and judged on the basis of those hypotheses. Of course, if there aren't specific hypotheses that you want to test because your field is not like that, then it's understood. But in this particular case, there were. One more thing that I want to add, which I already pointed out before, is that for me, it's always important that PIs make it clear to what extent work done on a project by PhD students can result in a clearly defined PhD thesis. That was one of the things that was most direly missing from my point of view in the climate change project. I've seen it many times that people are put to work on the project and they work closely with the PI, but it becomes increasingly clear as the project progresses that it is not feasible for the PhD students to carve out a domain of their own. So the project proposal should define that clearly, ideally.
Thank you very much for that. I'm looking at the chat. So some of these comments were already addressed. I think this one, that would be good to address. How much weight should one give to the risk assessment in parts B1 as opposed to B2? What do you think?
I would say that there must be a hint of this. It depends a bit on how risky a project is. If you have a very risky project, you have to say it from the beginning. Otherwise, it could be discarded at that step. Otherwise, if it's more really of a question of management of more concise issues, there is not the space in B1 for that. And in B1, it's more important to convey an idea that this is an important topic, which is innovative and original, and it should go through to the next step by the force of that argument, so that the risk point, only if you do something very risky, you should devote a whole paragraph to it of those 5 pages you have. Otherwise, make a mention, but don't use too much space for that.
Mm-hmm. There's one comment and a question by Julian as well. I'm still worried about scope. In terms of methods, fieldwork and archives, I have a difficult situation. However, I'm focusing on 3 neighboring countries formerly colonized by the same colonizer, and I'm worried this will be judged as too narrow, even though I think it is the only way to make it feasible. Choosing other countries, other colonizer, larger geographical scope on top of all other difficulties would make it possibly unfeasible. How to balance this? Any comments, any suggestions to Julian? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think in terms of, sorry if I speak too much, but I think on comparative analysis, I can say something. I think in terms of case selection, if you have any doubts, as you expressed, but still think that is what you should do, in this case, you should take some space to justify it. Maybe more in B2 again, for reasons of limited space. But if you have good reasons for your case selection, spell them out. And maybe even in B2, spell out that alternative options have drawbacks, which are bigger than the advantages of your option. Then that's fine. I think there is a general issue in ERC evaluations between innovativeness on the one side and feasibility on the other. That is often very difficult to say. Simplistically, you could say the more original something is, the less feasible it is, and the other way around. So every panel will have to make a balance there, and you have to give good reasons to want to do what you're proposing, and they should be given.
Thank you for that. And thank you, Professor Koren, for addressing this expertise point. We are about to finish. Would you like to add?
Just to comment on the expertise, I think what we did in the kind of this mock panel, I think that does happen, that if we feel that the area is farther out of our expertise than the other proposals, then we tend to be more cautious and let invite in other experts. Mm-hmm. So that's a potential outcome as well.
I guess I should be finishing as a moderator, but I do have one tiny question, and if I may, I would like to ask it. I can't see any other questions in the chat. What I'm sometimes thinking about is how is independence assessed, especially for starting grants? That got me thinking at some point. How do you know that an applicant is truly independent or independent enough to have their own team? Or is it often discussed? Is it one of the major points in the discussions? Independence or lack of independence?
I think in economics it's relatively simple. So it's basically journal publications without the advisor. Or a very senior colleague. I might not know necessarily who the advisor is. And sometimes it comes up. So when it gets to the publication record, and if there are like 1 or 2 top publications, then we actually look at it. But is this with the advisor? Are these solo, pseudo, with junior colleagues? This does come up. But I think maybe because it's so transparent, candidates know this in advance, so it's rarely an issue for concern at the panel discussion stage. I'd say like every 10th case, there's a bit of discussion about that.
All right. Any final comments from panel members?
Can I make a comment on that as well, on the same question? Also coming back to what was said in the first part of the meeting, because the independence question is related to this question of the window of eligibility. I think first thing to say is that panels are normally able, especially at the starting grant level, to make a distinction between someone who's just 2 years after the PhD and someone who's in the 7th year. So on the one hand, this means that there will be more independence, more experience of self-directed research be expected from someone who is academically older, in inverted commas. And panels can do that, no? Because that's the big advantage of ERC panels, that one can talk, there is time, and you can express it in the narrative, in the track record section. But I also wanted to say that, commenting on what was said in the first part, that one should, despite this, one should be aware of the fact, I think ERC statistics show that starting grant applications are more successful if some more experience is already there. So you may well apply after 2.5 years of your PhD, but statistically the chances are lesser than when you're more experienced. So it would be partly, you should always try, especially if you have a good idea, try, but you should already figure in that you may have to reapply with some more experience gained in an extra year.
Thank you so much for all the insight and for doing this with us. I hope it was useful to all attendees. So we are about to finish this event and the breakout room session. So thank you so much to panel members for your time and your insight. Thank you to all of you who participated in the event. We really hope it was useful to you. Thank you to the Young Academy of Europe and the Budapest Knowledge Hub of the Academia Europaea for organizing the event. We are so happy that we had so many of you attending, and yeah, we are happy that we could make it work. If any of you think that we as the Young Academy of Europe should organize more of these or similar events or other events related to anything that you might find useful for young scholars, please let us know. It's actually quite easy to find us online. So please give us some feedback if you think that there should be more of such events or other events organized by us. So thank you so much. I think this concludes this event, and yeah, thank you. I hope it was useful. Thank you so much.